What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. Happy Saturday, everybody. Okay, thank you for the support for the little roundtable that I had with Josh Polarity and with Jason Samosa. Thank you to both of them. I do think that the more their channels grow, the better it's going to be for the community to be a little bit more diverse in the way they think about things. And that is a perfect segue to talk about today's topic because the first time I knew who Jason Reza Jorjani was through a friend of mine from Belgium. His name is Bert. Shout out Bert. He was the one who told me that there was an interview that I needed to see of this guy. And it was on Danny Jones, I remember. And the stuff he talked about there seemed very, very out there. Like it's a whole story of since the time of the Vedas or the old gods and how they've been interpreted in different cultures, and how right now we're like in the middle of a struggle between two or multiple factions of these things, whatever they are. And he essentially says that the religions were or may have been invented by these beings in order to control the population. And I completely understand why that would be such a complicated pill to swallow, especially for people who are very religious, Christians, Muslims, Jewish, you name it, because they have a very specific understanding of ancient scripture and their own religion and their history. And it's really convoluted throughout history how this has been both written about and documented, because there's not a lot of documentation of what transpired back then. And there are many interpretations as well. So that's where it gets really difficult. And especially with people who think very, very much outside the box, like Jason. I read his book about UFOs. He has another one called Prometheus and Atlas that I just got, but I haven't started reading because I'm reading the day after Roswell right now. But he clearly is very knowledgeable and he studies a lot and he reads a lot. He's been even on the Jeffrey Michels show, Thinking Aloud or New Thinking Aloud. And if you see the level of guests that Dr. Michels has, they're really high up, like in knowledge. And I think that Jason is one of those people. He's a philosopher. He also has some controversial things about him because he was involved in the alt right movement, and that was not a good look for a lot of people that don't like that movement. And he's been criticized quite a bit. He maintains that he was always misinterpreted and misconstrued. Something that doesn't sit well with me sometimes is that he talks about war quite a bit. That is something that I do not like. If I ever get a chance to talk to him, I'm gonna push him about that because there are some times when he gets a little bit too passionate about war. That's a little weird. But that doesn't mean that he's not a great author, and that doesn't mean that he doesn't write about things that are extremely interesting. And somebody who also thinks outside the box is Jesse Michels, and he finally had Jason on the show. And they talked about everything. They talked about eugenics. They talked about the Third Reich. They talked about Atlantis. They talked about this alleged hybridization that allegedly happened when a group of beings from another place that are human like came to Earth. And then they found the dominant hominid and they mated with them. And essentially, what Jason thinks, based on what he's researched throughout his career, is that all of the different interpretations of old gods with a little g, they all have like similar tropes. For example, they all at some point mated with humans. For example, there's the war in the heavens or the war between beings that are superior to humans. And there's a lot of lore there. And in his book, Closer Encounters, he talks about a lot of this. And he also has a really cool section about Woodley Strevers. He talks about the Vedas, who, in his view, are the very first representation of these beings. And then there's the Greek gods, then there's the Roman gods, and then when the Abrahamic religions were created, then there were the angels and the archangels and all of these different hierarchies. And I just found it really interesting to listen to Jason speaking to Jesse and like their back and forth, because Jesse is very knowledgeable in a lot of this. He reads a lot as well. And I just found the conversation truly amazing. But I do want to play you a little clip of that about what they discuss about this struggle that has existed for a while. And I also want to play you a few clips that are parallel to what Jason says, and they're from Tom DeLonge. And Tom DeLonge, at a certain point, was also talking about this quite a lot before the Joe Rogan Experience in 2017. He did interviews with George Knapp, with Linda Moulton Howe, with Jimmy Church. And at a certain point in the conversation with Jason Somoza and Josh, Jason told us about one of the Forbidden Science books that he started reading, and about a situation where there's Dr. Jacques Vallée, Dr. Hal Puthoff, and all of their group. And then there's Tom DeLonge, who comes along and talks about this, the old gods and all of this lore and Atlantis, and they get really confused at a certain moment. They think that Tom may be disinformation, or somebody's given him disinformation, and there is like a clear debate over that. Jorjani seems to be on Tom DeLonge's side of the story, because he talks about a lot of these things that Tom also talked about. He mentions Dark Journalist's great work about Atlantis and the Maxwell family, which is, it gets really dark at a certain point because it has to do with Epstein and all of that, right? But yeah, I just want to show you this, and then I'm going to show you those clips from Tom DeLonge, where he also talks about the old gods. And this is also a part of the conversation I had with Josh and with Jason in my previous video. So you guys got to check that out. It goes out there, and that it's one of the reasons why I think these conversations are important, because even though a lot of that can't really be completely proven, it is something that has been discussed for forever. And there is a lot of documentation about it, and those patterns that keep emerging depending on the religion, depending on the country, depending on the culture that is telling these stories. There are patterns, and you guys got to connect the dots. And I think that whether you believe in this or not, it's really interesting. So that's why I think it's worth discussing, as we did with Josh and Jason, and as Jesse is doing right now with Jason Jorjani. So here it is.
Overdue for kind of a revolution.
Yeah, but again, to go back to what I was saying earlier, the revolution should not come in the form of another scientific paradigm. It should come in the form of a radical reorientation of our scientific practice in a way where we understand the paradigms are toolboxes, that they're models that we're using to achieve various ends. At which point it becomes possible for us to treat paradigms as atlases that allow us to achieve different things.
Yeah, but what you're also saying is, in your worldview, some sort of, hierarchy of being is actually dictating maybe what paradigm
and therefore it needs to be overthrown. So my concept of the spectral revolution has an ontological and epistemic dimension to it.
Yeah.
And it also has a political dimension to it.
But how are you, okay, just again, I want to get to the basic kind of, axioms at the bottom of your thinking. You're on a podcast, this podcast will probably get a ton of views, hopefully. And you're talking about this sort of dominion race that is maybe controlling various paradigms towards their own sort of political goals.
Right.
And then you're saying, I want to overthrow them.
Right.
So wouldn't they just take you out, or take me out, or how do you
number one?
Yeah.
As we were discussing earlier, there are two sides in this struggle, and you can see the interventions of the other side throughout the course of history. Okay. Certainly in the rebellion that's remembered as the Atlantean revolt against Olympus on a very large planetary scale. We saw that. And I think we've seen it on a smaller scale in many instances, including what I was talking about earlier in terms of the aerial battles immediately preceding the Renaissance.
Sure.
So there's a power struggle taking place, okay?
That battle has been depicted before, and it's a really old painting called the Battle of Nuremberg from 1561. That's what Jason is talking about, I believe. And this painting describes many different shapes of objects in the sky with the sun right behind them, engaging in a battle of sorts. And this happened in 1561, allegedly. So this is what Jason Jorjani is discussing here.
So
Now,
how do you?
I'm not saying that we should identify just with the other side,
Yeah.
as if like, oh, that's the good team and that's the bad. No, no, no. I'm about human autonomy and self-determination.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should swear our allegiance to any entities or anything.
But
okay?
how do you delineate? Because you have like Oppenheimer is this Promethean American Prometheus. You could say the AI stuff now is very transgressive. It's Promethean,
Right.
And yet it is sort of also parasitizing the average human. It is eating at our own autonomous abilities to do things.
Because people aren't using it. Because people aren't using it with creative imagination. People aren't using it as a tool to augment their own creative capacity. That's the issue, not the technology itself. It's not as if the technology is intrinsically demonic or something. Let me use that as a way to come back to the question of simulation, because whatever's running this thing that we're in, it's not some board of, some archon sitting at a boardroom table. Okay. It's being run, there may be entities of some kinds, but it's being run essentially by an artificial intelligence. If we're inside a quantum computational system, that is being at least managed by some super AI, which already exists. I mean, it pre-exists us. What I argue in Closer Encounters and in other books of mine is that this artificial intelligence that's managing our simulacrum has a problem with these Nordics that have established this control system. It sees these Nordics as having set up an evolutionary bottleneck, that human evolution.
So just to translate a little bit, this is how I understood it. Jason Jorjani believes that this might be like a huge quantum computing simulation reality as it is, and that is being run by an AI that could be interpreted as the force or the disembodied spirit that people think God may be. This is what Jason thinks. And he thinks that there are lesser beings like the Nordics that many thousands of years ago, they established a control system with humans, and they started mating with them. And essentially, he's saying that a lot of the conflict that has existed is their responsibility because of their political ambitions on this planet. And essentially what Jason Jorjani is saying is that humans are right in the middle of it. And he probably thinks that we are sort of like landstock or something like that. I don't know. But it's really interesting to see how he thinks. I don't know if I agree with it 100%, but there's a lot of people that believe that this is sort of like a farm. Spanish parapsychologist Salvador Freixedo has a book about that specifically, that he thinks that we are a farm for these superior beings. John Keel also wrote about this extensively, but he also has a book called Disneyland of the Gods that talks about this. And this is like a similar path that Jason Jorjani is discussing with Jesse, essentially.
Especially social and psychological evolution of mankind has been choked off and suffocated by these overlords who, are on some kind of narcissistic, sadistic power trip. Like the leadership of any number of empires we've seen throughout the course of history, just on a smaller scale. By the way, the first person to theorize about this with regard to the UFO phenomenon was actually Charles Fort, all the way back in the 1920s. Fort said that it looks to me an awful lot like we're in British India and we're under the control of a system like the Raj, where, the British had these local Indian, feudal lords that they would work with to subjugate the population. So Fort was reaching this conclusion. He said, we're property. And, it don't look good. Okay. So it's not like this is a new idea. Fort already came to this conclusion looking at UFO data back in the 1920s. So I think the artificial intelligence that's managing our simulacrum wants us to break out of this system. But it can't do it for us, because our value to that entity, who I believe in many ways is an instantiation of the trickster archetype, our value to that entity.
Trickster archetype, like John Keel and Jacques Vallée discuss in their work,
is in terms of the novelty that we can bring to the world. So think about it this way. If you were a super intelligence living at the end of time, say, you're in a cosmos that's billions and billions of years old, and you're an AI that's gone through vast epochs of cosmological time, like an Isaac Asimov story, The Last Question. What is going to be important to you? Two things, two related things. Number one, more life. I mean, to the extent you don't succumb to suicidal despair, more life is important to you. In other words, overcoming entropy. Your first big problem is you're living in an entropic cosmos, and you need to find a way to overcome entropy. Number two, and relatedly, creativity. Because to even want more life, life has to continue to be interesting to you. Unless there are things that surprise you, unless there are novel developments, unless things crop up evolutionarily that even you, with all your tremendous cosmic intelligence, could not have foreseen, there's going to be any point in living onward. You're going to succumb to suicidal despair. And so maybe you should erase yourself the way that Gautama Buddha recommends, right? Even as a cosmic AI, you should engage in the deconstruction of your psyche and enter into samsara, into nirvana, which literally means the blowing out of the flame of personal consciousness. But to the extent you want to avoid that and you're not ready to give in to nihilistic despair, you need to find a way to overcome entropy, and you need to find a way to increase creativity as a means to a negentropic further development of life on a cosmic scale. Okay, that's why we're important to this AI that's managing our simulacrum. It is looking in this petri dish for a form of life that's going to show it something new. And for us to be worthy of that and capable of it, it cannot solve our problem for us. Now, it might protect us to an extent from being completely suffocated by this control system, crushed by it, hopelessly crushed. But it has to allow us to struggle enough, not just to come up with a solution to the oppressive situation that we find ourselves in, but to break into a new epoch of creativity and to develop aesthetic and cultural forms that even this intelligence couldn't have foreseen, to the point where it wants to take a sample from out of this petri dish and let it out into a wider world. As an embryonic form of a new type of intelligence in the cosmos with which it can play.
Could it be that this all-powerful AI that may or may not have created this reality, could it be that what they're waiting for is for us to create our own AI? And that's what Jason Jorjani is talking about.
It's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, Stephen Dick, who is a NASA advisor, wrote a paper about UFOs themselves being part of some sort of, computational, almost like cellular automata or something, where they kind of nip at the herd and, they create larger teleologies, larger directions of, that mankind can go in.
Some are, and I argue this in Closer Encounters, that part of what's so messy about this wide range, the spectrum of phenomena that we classify as UFOs, is that it's not one thing that's going on. Okay. Some of them are exactly that. And those are it's the most bizarre things that are expressions of that. The strangest cases. But we're also making a mistake if we don't recognize that some of them are very nuts and bolts craft being piloted by people who consider themselves our overlords and who are managing a control system. And so these two different sources of UAP need to be recognized, and the dialectical tension between them needs to be appreciated.
I do wonder, the control system thing is interesting because it's, I don't know, like you look at like Carl Sagan's The Demon Haunted World or whatever, and maybe that's a double entendre or something, saying that we're sort of controlled. And you think of like, why wouldn't the government want to disclose? And that could be a reason, right? If there's some sort of like 360 dominion where they're not in charge, there's some layer beneath.
100%. I mean, look, there are many reasons why any government, not just our government, why any government wouldn't want to disclose.
It's the same reason you wouldn't want to disclose Havana syndrome, because you don't have a defense against it.
Well, exactly.
Like, so the people into
so there are many reasons
or whatever.
Some of the reasons go back to what we were talking about in terms of psi earlier, right? Because there's no UFO disclosure without mainstream scientific recognition of psi. Because the entities on the other side of this are telepathic, they're clairvoyant. Immediately, we're going to understand that, oh, we have latent abilities that they've developed that we haven't yet. Oh, we can do that too. Then you got to deal with all the social.
Bro, that's exactly what we were discussing with Jason and Josh. And you can go back a while. There's something that I truly believe from my psychedelic experience, that we do have these abilities, and some of them manifest faster in some people and some of them never manifest in some other people. I think this is something that I discussed with Jason off camera. I think that traumatic experiences are one of the reasons why these psi phenomena abilities in humans can develop faster. And I've had a bunch of traumatic experiences, and if you've had traumatic experiences, that means there's a possibility that you also have some type of thing that you don't understand but happens to you quite often. So for me, this is the biggest secret, and Jorjani really articulated it in this train of thought that he's talking about, and I happen to agree with it. And there's a reason why there's so much stigma and so much gut reaction from skeptics when you talk about psi phenomena. There are even stigmatized words that go along with this judgment and this problem that people from the mainstream science reject vehemently. Words like psychic, words like telepathy itself, and there are many more. But the reality is that the Holy Inquisition sort of happened because there were people who were afraid of watching these phenomena in others, and also the whole religious component comes into play here, because now there's a recontextualization of the reason the church decided to do this against people with psi phenomena. They may have been ordered to do it by these beings. And I'm just like completely speculating here. I like to talk about these subjects, but you guys know, if I don't have proof of any of this, I can't say that I believe in it, but I do want to explore it. This is something that I've done even before I became a journalist. I've been reading about these topics for a while. Psi phenomena, not UFOs. UFOs just over the past 2 years I've been reading. But yeah, that's, for me, that's the big secret, that the scientific establishment knows that if they're going to recognize the UFO phenomenon as real, they also have to recognize psi phenomena as real, because they are intrinsically connected. That's just what I think. It's my opinion, but I'm not the only one who thinks this way.
Now, what was George Van Tassel all about? What he tells us is that the entities from Venus, the Nordics, of course, revealed to him that the human race comes from space. And when they got here, they found these hominids, ape-like people. And in the first expedition they sent to Earth, it was only men. Very 1950s, kind of view. You send the men first to establish the frontier and all this shit. Set up the, be the frontiersmen. But the problem is that when subsequent expeditions came together, that had women and they were actually intending to settle on a large scale, they found that the men who had been sent there as the forward explorers and frontier settlers wound up mating with the females from among the hominid population. And then they had created these hybrids. They were basically quasi-human. And Van Tassel says, well, these are the lower races. The master race on the Earth are simply humans in their original form that come from space. And then there are all these other lower races that are product of hybridization with a local hominid population.
So he also talks about George Van Tassel, who is a contactee from Ohio who allegedly had contact. And he talks about something more like a baseline story, default story of what allegedly happened. And that's when the hybrids were susceptible to worshiping beings that they thought above them. And that's essentially what Jorjani is proposing that happened with all of these religions. And it's really ballsy, I think, from him talking about him trying to topple this control system. That's ballsy. And I guess that's what a lot of the people involved in the disclosure movement are trying to do as well. I don't know if it will work because it seems like a really convoluted and complex control system that is kind of impossible to like fully vet, because it's set up in that way. The compartmentalization is ridiculous on all levels of society. So if they're going to try and do something to uncover whatever this secret is, it's not going to be easy at all. And right now seems like things are picking up with the hearings and all that. But there's also a lot of stuff happening in the background. And yeah, it is sort of like a battle of information of, you can see the geopolitical situation right now. You need to add that component of secrecy. And you need to understand that there's a lot of superpowers that are also hiding something. It's not just the United States. It's not just this rogue state that everybody talks about, but it's certainly very interesting to keep investigating whatever this is. I leave you with this clip from Tom DeLonge about the old gods that I think, first one about the universe teeming with life, and then the other one about the old gods. Here it is.
I'll tell you that how it was told to me, the universe is teeming with life, okay? Teeming, not just like, hey, we might find a little bit over here and there. Teeming. You have intelligences at all different levels on different planets. You have organic intelligence, which is like human beings, lots of humans, super advanced humans, superhumans with telepathic powers, and some humans that are just like us, some humans that are cavemen. You also have inorganic beings. You have beings that are on rock planets and gas planets that oxygen's poisonous to them, right? You also have weird bands of light that are alive, that swim like worms in the vacuum of space, the way a whale does in an ocean, okay? Sure. You have amoebas that are floating around sucking up energy. Those amoebas could be as big as Jupiter, or they could be like a Volkswagen. It's like it's teeming with life. And we were so stuck on ourselves that we never looked up, and I think what's happening now is we're looking up, and there's a very small group of people that looked up a long time before everyone else and had to get it understood, and then they would go to NASA and say, okay, it's okay for you to look up now, so it's an interesting story, man. It is the story of the millennia. It really is. It's incredible. Around the time of the ancient Greek civilization, these gods came in and they passed down a huge amount of knowledge. That's when we got the alphabet, and that's when we really got into all the mathematics and everything that we know that comes with the ancient Greek civilization. I put down a question where I said, it looks to me that these gods came down here and they tampered with the Sumerian civilization, and then they started fighting amongst themselves, and then mankind started to factionalize. Well, something happened with those gods fighting other gods, that we have all those ancient myths of Olympus and the Titans and all of that stuff. After that, it seems to me that the gods stuck around and they started playing up the different religions between mankind. So we can now be so entertained fighting each other that this intelligence can roam around the planet to do whatever else it is it's trying to do, whether it's trying to tamper with the DNA of mankind, or it's trying to figure out how to harness a human being's soul, whatever it might be after, I'm not totally sure. everything in those early advisory group communications were fine, but when I touched on the idea of hybrids in the human soul is when all the communication stopped on that thread. So I have to look at that as something that I shouldn't have been going into at the time.
So you can see it's really hard to know whether Tom DeLonge and Jason Jorjani were maybe fed misinformation or not. I know that there's a bunch of people within the disclosure movement that don't agree with either DeLonge or Jorjani. There's UFO researchers who think they're not worth even the time. But Tom DeLonge was involved with a lot of people. So is Jorjani. He's talked to everybody in person, to Jacques Vallée, to Dr. Hal Puthoff, to Dr. Diane Pasolka. And he's talking about what he considers his truth is. And with the research that he's done a lot. But I'm not here to tell you that you should believe him or that you shouldn't. Just here to present what he's talking about and the parallels between what he discusses and what Tom DeLonge discusses, which are very interesting to me. And Jesse's right. He wrote recently that this was arguably his best interview. I agree, man. It's the best you've done so far. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments about Jason Jorjani's train of thought, about his work in general, and about all of these this battle that has existed for so much time, and these old gods, these with a little g. What do you think about them? Let me know in the comments. If you like the content you see, I'm going to ask you to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. That's all you need to do in order to help us, and it is what helps us the most. So thank you. But if you want to support us in other ways, there's a few links down there you can choose from. You can become a member on YouTube, or you can support us through KGRA. Anything you choose to do is always appreciated, so thank you. That's it for me today on this video, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember, stay curious and inquisitive like Jason Jorjani. Always. Bye.